Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us again as we continue our study of globalism and Sharia, the subtle surrender of sovereignty to the kingdom of Antichrist. Since we've started this study, I told you what to expect, and we've been following through. I'm going to get to that slide in a second, but last week in our I shouldn't say last week, in our previous studies, we started with the origins of divided nations from Noah landing in the ark on Ararat to his migration to the land of Iraq and the Tower of Babel, and how from there the lands were divided amongst Noah's descendants and how those inherited lands were divided. In our subsequent study, we talked about the importance of understanding the original inheritance agreement between Noah and his three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, but specifically the significance as it progressed from Noah and Shem and Appershad and the land that Canaan took over that he wasn't supposed to take, and how ultimately that transition from Appershad and his great grandson Abraham, and how Abraham was basically just retaking the land that was promised to Appershad out of Canaan's hands, and how that was promised through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and ultimately it wasn't realized until Moses and Joshua. So we've talked about those things, and last week we talked about the trifecta of the root of bitterness and really what's going on in the Middle East, and how Ishmael was disinherited and driven out of Abraham's presence, and how when he left, he settled in Paran, which is actually the land of Muhammad's ancestors, Muhammad, the founder of Islam. How Esau was disinherited and driven out basically by himself and his own selfishness because of agreements that he made with Jacob, and then Jacob deceiving his father and getting the blessing. So we can see that Esau did it to himself, but then he settled in the land just north of Paran and married into Ishmael's family. So we can see an intermarriage there, which is going to come into play, we'll see today in our reading. But then how the third in that aspect of bitterness was how the Canaanites, who, again, they took land that did not belong to them, and how they were driven out of that land by Moses and Joshua, and how they would have settled, those that weren't killed as instructed, but how they would have settled in the surrounding regions in the Middle East. So we can see that trifecta, Ishmael's roots of bitterness, Esau's roots of bitterness, and the Canaanites' roots of bitterness as they settled throughout the Middle East. And how from generation to generation to generation, that animosity and that bitterness was really thrust upon Israel, and how Israel's land has been taken and overtaken and retaken and overtaken and split and divided so many times. We'll probably get into that a little bit. That's not the thrust of our study today, but we can see how much that land has been in turmoil, even at God's hands. And we can see through reading Jeremiah and Isaiah and some of the other prophets how God, not only did he declare judgment on other nations, but he declared judgment on the nation of Israel itself for their disobedience and cast them aside. So we can see all these things interplaying in the unfolding events of the Middle East. But what I want to get into today is what further to expect in this, because we've already covered the real roots of bitterness, and today we're going to get into the rise and fall of world powers from Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel to present day, comparing Revelation to Daniel. So the revelation that John had to what Daniel saw. And then next week we'll get into the consolidation of world powers and how current headlines are really showing the acquiescence to Islam, and how all roads lead to Basel, or to Switzerland, I should rename that, and the rise of the New World Order. That'll probably take us a couple weeks to go through. But we're going to start to see from the beginning to end where the roots started, how the rise and fall of world powers, they happened exactly how the Bible laid them out, and how that's all coming to pass today, and how everything is coming together. So let's start with Daniel's dream, or Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and Daniel's interpretation of that dream. In Daniel 2, we see this. Daniel basically, I'm not going to go back through the whole story of Nebuchadnezzar's dream and how he went to all his people. I'm not going to read that part of the story. Ultimately, it landed on Daniel to interpret this dream because he had a gift of God. It was recognized that he had a gift of God. So Daniel is before the king, and he says, "You saw, O king, and behold, a great image. This image mighty and of exceeding brightness stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked, a stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces, and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hands he has given, wherever they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens, making you rule over them all. You are the head of gold. Another kingdom inferior to you shall rise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with the soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. Now I mentioned the fact that intermarriage of Ishmael and Esau would come into play. Here we can see that Daniel is talking about these kingdoms that are going to be mixed together in marriage, but they won't hold together. And if we look at chapter 11 of Daniel, we can also see that the king of the north and the king of the south, they try to intermarry. And we'll get into who the king of the north and the king of the south is as we talk about these images later in the study. But we can see over and over again how that intermarriage, there's conflict even within this broken kingdom. Verse 44, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and in the broken pieces, the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. So we can see from this vision that there's this huge statue that God has shown Nebuchadnezzar. And here's the succession of the kingdoms. As we look at traditional history, we can look through secular history and we can see the breakdown of how these actually happened. We're not going to talk about successor kingdoms to the Babylonian Empire because we're talking about Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of the Babylonian Empire, the empire that took over the Jewish kingdom and brought them into captivity. That's how Daniel is there. Okay, so we're going to look at that kingdom, and we can see that Babylon was the world power from 605 BC to 539 BC, when Cyrus the Great used Darius to kill Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's son. You can see that happen in Daniel chapter 5. So we can verify that those events happen. Now I want to have this little side note. There's a lot of people throughout history that have tried to say, well, Daniel was written after the fact and after the development of the kingdoms. But that doesn't hold true. I mean, part of it, even if it was true, you could see that some of this was written after the fact from, going from the Babylonian kingdom to the Medo-Persian kingdom. And if it was supposedly written after the fact, maybe even the Greek Empire. But there's no way that you could delineate it going to the iron and clay. There's no way that you could see that happen because we know for a fact that the book of Daniel was written before the Septuagint, and the Septuagint was written in the 2nd century BC. So we know that it was in that book was in existence before the Roman Empire ever came into power. Okay? So here we go. We see the gold, which is the head. That's the Babylonian Empire. We see the silver, which is the successor kingdom. And we can see the two arms. It was a split kingdom, the Medo-Persian Empire. The Medo-Persian Empire reigned until 332 BC, when Alexander the Great conquered Darius III. Now, we have the bronze, which takes over the abdomen and the upper thighs. Again, the Greek Empire was a divided empire. You have Alexander the Great, who reigned until his death in 323 BC, but then his kingdom was divided between four kings. And we'll show you those four kings in a minute. So we have a divided kingdom, and it reigned until 168 BC, when Rome conquered Perseus, the king of Macedonia. Then we see the Iron Kingdom, or the Roman Empire, take over. That was also a divided kingdom, emphasized by the two legs. We had the eastern and the western divisions of the kingdom. Rome was a united kingdom at first, and it reigned with an iron fist until AD 476, but then it kind of split apart, and the western part of the kingdom kind of fell into disrepair, and the eastern part of the division was really the part that was in more power, and it didn't totally fall until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. But then the final kingdom that's referenced here in this is the Ottoman Empire, the iron and the clay, where its roots can be traced all the way back to Muhammad, but it didn't truly get recognized as a true world empire until about the 1299, and it didn't cement its power until it conquered the region with the fall of Constantinople in 1453, when the Byzantine Empire fell. Now, here's the interesting part. From the 11th century till the 15th century is where we see the Crusades happening. Who were those Crusades by? The ruling authority in the Roman Empire on the Western Division, which is the Roman Catholic Church, and the Muslims who had started to take over the territory from 622 until the time that those Crusades were over. The Crusades lasted all the way until about 1467, even though Constantinople had fallen. So we can see that as Rome was falling in power, the Muslim Empire was rising in power. And that Muslim Empire didn't end until it fell really in 1918 in the aftermath of World War I, but didn't officially get dismantled until 1924. So we can see that these events unfolded exactly as this dream was revealed to Nebuchadnezzar. And again, you can go back through history and you can look at this. Now, why are we only focusing on these kingdoms? Because we know that when you look at the dynasties of China, there's all kinds of dynasties that happened in this time frame. But you have to understand that the Bible is a book with Middle Eastern roots, written by Middle Eastern people about Middle Eastern events, about a Middle Eastern future. The whole Bible is about the Middle East. It's not about America, although there are things that you might be able to pull in and interpret as things that might apply to America, and we'll talk about that a little bit today. You can also look at some other events in world history that you might be able to pull in and think that they may apply, but the reality is that the Bible is a book about Middle Eastern events. It doesn't have to do with America or the Far East and China and Japan and Korea and Vietnam and other world events that have happened. I don't want to say they're irrelevant, but they don't play into the greater story of the people that the Bible is written to. So this is the unfolding of the kingdoms or the successive kingdoms that have taken control of the Middle Eastern region. Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire is going to be the important empire that we're going to look at as we look at the Revelation to John. But before we get there, I want to talk about the chapter 7 revelation that Daniel had and chapter 8 revelation, because they're completely related. And I need to revise this a little bit because there's something that I think really plays into the fourth beast in chapter 7. But as you read chapter 7, we're not going to read it today. You can go read it on your own. But you'll see that what was revealed to Daniel were 4 separate beasts. The first beast was like a lion with eagle's wings, and its wings were plucked. And ultimately it lost its mind. It was given a mind of a man at the end. And that completely represents Nebuchadnezzar. There's a second beast that was represented to Daniel with a bear raised on one side. It was an uneven empire with 3 ribs in his mouth, which coincides with the Medo-Persian Empire. There was a third beast. It was a leopard that had 4 wings with 4 heads, and it was given dominion. And those 4 heads correlate directly with the Greek Empire that was broken up after Alexander the Great, because those 4 kingdoms were split in there were actually 6 kingdoms that were split, but they were consolidated into 4, where Seleucus was given Asia Minor all the way to Persia, so basically part of Turkey and what you would see in Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and Iran all the way over to India. You had Ptolemy, which was given basically Egypt and maybe into northern Saudi Arabia, but all the way over into Egypt and northern Africa. You had Cassander, which was Macedonia, which was the other side of Turkey over in towards Italy. And then you had Thrace, which was Lysimachus. So you had the 2 major, and that's why I was saying that there's 2 major kingdoms with the Greek Empire that would represent the 2 upper thighs, would have been the Seleucid dynasty and the Ptolemaic dynasty, because they were really the ones that had the power. And as you look at Daniel chapter 11, you'll see a battle that goes back and forth between the king of the north and the king of the south, which would have been the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic dynasties, between those people that were in Turkey and Persia and those people that were in Egypt. So you can see those things unfolding just as history decided. But then the 4th beast in chapter 7, was a dreadful beast with iron teeth and bronze claws, having 10 horns. Now, I have that down just representing the Ottoman Empire, but I can see throughout history how when you have the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire, and they're fighting for territory for hundreds of years, thousands of years, between 1096 AD all the way to 1467 AD, you can see the clash of those 2 empires. They were fighting over the same territory. So that 4th beast, it's easy to see how those iron teeth and the bronze claws, which would represent the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire joined together, the Bronze Empire being the Seleucid dynasty and the Egyptian dynasty, which is absolutely the Ottoman Empire's territory. You can see how all that plays together. So there's no reason to separate that 4th beast from the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire. It's easy to see how they would be lumped together, how chapter 7 covers that whole territory. And then chapter 8 really only gives emphasis on 2 kingdoms. You have the ram with uneven horns, and it's very specific that it's talking about the takeover of the Medo-Persian Empire, and the goat with a notable horn that breaks into 4 notable horns to replace the one. And as you look at the story and how that goat just comes over the earth and it just takes over everything, it moves very fast. It's just like the conquest of Alexander the Great and how he took over with such great power, but there was no coordination of power within that government that he had. It was easy for it to break apart because after his death there was no cohesiveness. So again, I'm not going to get into all of that. I've already written about it in a book. I go through it in great detail, but as you look at the book of Daniel, chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8 all go hand in hand. Chapter 5 tells the story of the transition of power between the Babylonian and the Medo-Persian Empire and the death of Belshazzar, and how that was even foretold to Belshazzar. Then you can read chapter 11 and how you can see the battle of the kingdoms between the north and the south, and ultimately in chapter 12 where it talks about the end times and the development of what's going to happen in the future. So the book of Daniel is really a roadmap from what has happened in the past to what is happening today. If we just look at that, but it gets more interesting as we look at John's vision in the book of Revelation. There's 2 revelations of a beast, chapter 13 and chapter 17, and we're going to go over those right now. Chapter 13 says, "And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns, and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed. And the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" Now I want to just focus on a couple things in this passage before we move on to chapter 17. This imagery is not without reason. We see the same imagery in chapter 7 of Daniel with the bear and the leopard and the lion. Same exact imagery. We can see the dragon giving power to the beast. We can see in the nation of Islam that this religion was just, it came out of nowhere. And if you look at the history of how Muhammad received the revelation and how he himself thought he was demon possessed and how Satan himself gave him the authority and the power and the name, I mean, all of this just fits together so perfectly. But let's continue on and look at Revelation chapter 17. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on the earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of martyrs of Jesus. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. But the angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction." Now notice that the beast is the one who was and is not and is about to rise to power. Okay? And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, five of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but belongs to the 7 and goes to destruction. That's the important part that we need to understand about the beast, because the beast is in effect an 8th kingdom, but it comes from the 7. It was and is not and is to come, because as you read in the first revelation in 13 of this beast, one of those heads had a mortal wound that seemed to be a mortal wound, but it was healed. So that 7th kingdom becomes the 8th kingdom. Okay, so that's how the interplay happens with this vision. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. Now, remember the vision of Daniel. It had 10 toes on those feet. 10 kings correlate to the 10 toes. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. So these 10 kingdoms become part of that final kingdom. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those with him are called and chosen and faithful. And the angel said to me, "The waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated, are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Now that's the part where people try and correlate that woman, that prostitute that's sitting on top of this eighth beast, as the United States, because the United States currently has dominion over all the kings of the earth, and the kings of the earth have, basically taken part in all the prostitution and all the stuff that America has spewed out. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I will say this: we can see very clearly who this eighth beast is with the 7 heads and the 10 diadems. So we can see all this interplay. Now let's look at the visions and compare them side by side, because as we look at history, John in his present day was ruled, the world was ruled by the Roman Empire. Even though Israel was its own nation, it was under the auspices of the Roman Empire. We can see that throughout the New Testament as we read about who really had power between Herod and even Paul, and in the aftermath of what happened in the book of Acts. You can see all the interplay and how Rome was really at the seat of power. Okay? So this image that we just read about, this vision that he had, it talked about how there were 5 previous kingdoms that had fallen. There was one that was, and there was one that was yet to come. Those were the 7 heads. And then there was an 8th kingdom, which represented the beast, and the 8th kingdom belonged to the 7. Okay? That was the interplay. So as we look at history, we can see that before the Babylonian Empire that was in Daniel's time, there were 2 major kingdoms that ruled in the Middle East: the Egyptian Empire and the Assyrian Empire that succeeded the Egyptian Empire. The Babylonian Empire is the successor to the Assyrian Empire. So we can see very clearly that those line up exactly with the vision of Daniel, because there would have been the Egyptian Empire, then the Assyrian, then the Babylonian, then the Medo-Persian, then the Greek, then the Roman Empire that lined up with John's day. The kingdom that would come in the future after the Roman Empire, even though there was interplay between those for a few thousand years, the Ottoman Empire was ultimately the successor kingdom that ruled the Middle East over the Roman Empire. And ultimately, as we can see history unfolding, the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist at the beginning of the 20th century in 1923, and is now rising to power again as what will be the successor kingdom, an 8th kingdom, where we can see even today, everywhere across this globe, everybody giving way to the Islamic world and giving cover and telling people what you see with your eyes and what you hear in the news isn't really what represents the Islamic faith. It is the Islamic faith to the true core teachings of what the Islamic faith really is. So that is how all this interplays from start to finish, as we can see history unfolding itself from where it was given as a vision to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel's interpretation, then a revelation that confirmed that to John, and how John then confirms what Daniel had to say about the Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire and how it would go forth. But now I want to backtrack to something that I didn't cover and how it further confirms from the book of Daniel, because in chapter 7, you can see that the 4th beast with the iron teeth and the bronze claws having 10 horns has an 11th horn coming up from among them that subdues 3 others. So we have these 10 horns, but there's an 11th horn. There's an 11th person that rises to power. And in the 8th chapter, you have these 4 horns, or the 4 inferior kingdoms, but then there's a little horn that grows out of them that becomes exceedingly great. And we can see that, again, in the chapter 11, you have the interplay in Daniel chapter 11. You see the interplay between the king of the north and the king of the south, and how the king of the north is the one that ultimately becomes the victor. And where is the seat of power for the Ottoman Empire? It was in Turkey. Where do we see people fighting over territory now that are claiming to be the Islamic State? The Levant, which is northern Syria, southern Turkey, over into Iraq, the area of Babylon. So we can see that this interplay that encompasses the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and the territory that they fought over, that the Ottoman Empire ultimately took control over, how there's going to be a final leader that raises up to fill that eighth kingdom's leadership spot, and how that leader is absolutely, without a question, going to come out of the territory of northern Syria and southern Turkey. The interplay is there. Don't take my word for it. Go read the book of Daniel from start to finish and really study everything it has to say, and you will understand very clearly the unfolding of the end times and who the Antichrist is going to be. Because the part that was confusing to me for so many years was tied to the temple and the destruction of the temple, and how the Roman Empire really appeared to be the one that destroys the temple, but in actuality it was the dynasty, or the Roman legion that was located in northern Syria. So all of this plays together. It all comes together in one nice tidy little package. And again, I've gone over all this so many times in the past, but it's so important for us to understand how all these events, there's nothing by happenstance. It all goes back to Noah. It all goes back to disobedience from the children of Noah not taking rightful possession of their land, the animosity that created, how God had to intervene and say, okay, I'm giving back this land to its rightful owners, and how the promise was made to Abraham, but Ishmael was displaced. And it was made to Jacob, but it was ultimately displaced because Jacob's kids, they didn't, as you go through, Isaac's kids, through Jacob and Esau, Jacob inherited, Esau was supposed to. So Esau displaced himself, and ultimately how all that interplays with the intermarriage of Esau and Ishmael, the intermarriage of the kingdom of the north and the kingdom of the south. All those things play into each other to see the final unfolding of what's happening today, how Canaan was displaced and all the bitterness that all those displacements caused. And the passage that we read from the Quran that tells the people of the Islamic faith, drive them out from where they have driven you out. So we can see that there was a command, Satan giving it directly to Muhammad, saying, here's what you are to do. You are to be in battle with these people and cast them out where they have cast you out. That is why they're fighting over the area of Jerusalem today. Okay? So all this interplays. It all interplays, and it was all spelled out by Daniel, and it was confirmed by John. We'll get into next week, again, how all this is coming into play today. We can see from the development of the nation of Israel in the 1940s, the Six-Day War in 1967, and how it's come to fruition today, and what's happening today. And this is how Rome and the Ottoman Empire are still in interplay. I don't want to spoil it too much, but you can see a convergence of the Islamic world and the Catholic faith. Again, God wasn't confused when he gave us all this imagery. We may not understand it until we can look back in hindsight and see it, but we can see the interplay and how everything is still coming together exactly how God ordained. Clay and iron still portrays the Middle East today. It's never going to be united, because when Esau received his, quote, blessing from from Isaac, he absolutely received a curse that said you will always be in battle with your brothers. So there's no way to look at this and not understand that God has everything under control. His eternal promise to Abraham still stands today, and we get to be the benefactors of it, but we need to be faithful to the end. So that's a lot to cover in a short study. A lot to cover. You have to really go back and read the book of Daniel, read the passages in Revelation and compare them back and forth. You'll start to see how it all unfolds. Go back and look at history. Go back at some history books that cover the history of world dynasties, and you'll see how it all interplays together. Again, that was a lot to cover. I tried not to talk too fast, but I hope that you get the idea that, again, that none of this is happenstance, that God has it all under control, and he's given us a roadmap to follow. so that we can see Jesus in his words of warning in Matthew 24 when he says, when you see all these happening, when you see the wars and the rumors of war, when you see the famines and you see the pestilence and you see the earthquakes, just this week again, Japan was devastated with 3 earthquakes. So we can see all these warnings. You want to talk about the seas raging and people dying in fear of what's going on, or their hearts melting in fear. What about climate change? What about all these fear mongers that are trying to worry people to death about what's happening in our climate? Again, the Bible is absolutely a roadmap that we can follow. It is completely reliable because we have a reliable God, the creator of heaven and earth, that sees the beginning from the end and the end from the beginning. Because to him, he lives outside of the time that he created for us. He knows all things. So just have faith in the fact that God has told us what's going to happen, what did happen, and what's going to happen. So anyway, let's close as we always do, remembering Jesus' sacrifice, knowing that even it was foretold and happened just as it was supposed to, as a signpost for us for the faithfulness of God. Knowing that when he was in the upper room, he took the bread and he gave it to his disciples and he said, "This is my body, which is broken for you. Take and eat." So in remembrance of Jesus' sacrifice, we eat. Afterwards, we know he took the cup and he gave it to his disciples. And he said, "This is my blood which is shed for the forgiveness of your sins. Take and drink." So in remembrance of his sacrifice, we drink. Heavenly Father, we don't take these things for granted. We are so blessed to have a God that cares for us so much, that not only did he give us directions and guidance, but provided the only means of salvation to fallen man, to restore us to right relationship with you through the death of Jesus Christ, your Son. We thank you for that. We thank you, Jesus, for your faithfulness and obedience to death on the cross and the power of resurrection, so that we can truly be reunited and have new life in you because of the power of that resurrection. As we go our separate ways and we ponder the things that we've studied today, I pray that the Spirit would teach us, guide us, and instruct us, and make the Word come alive to us, and give us a hunger to go deep and study the Scriptures so that we can make them a part of who we are. Go before us, I pray. Give us guidance, direction, and protection by the power of the Holy Spirit. I ask this in your precious and holy name, Lord Jesus. Amen. Thanks again for joining us. This has been another study with One Source Ministries. Join us again next week as we continue to study the Word of God.